feel that the mission of training, the objective of training, is to improve individual and organization performance, those two things. Can't have one without the other. Improving individual's performance without it being connected to the organization doesn't make any sense, and we prove that over and over again. Nor does it make any sense to try something that benefits the organization and doesn't benefit the people. So we have that joint objective. And doing that is not as easy as it sounds. And I was pleased by Brian's comments talking about the future, the next part of the future, in addition to all the constraints. Also the opportunity, he mentioned the opportunity of broadening the scope of the training function, looking at other alternatives to supplement what we're doing in training to bring about increased performance in the organization. And I think that is really the way that we have to go. I think that in many cases, I don't know about here, but in many cases, the training organization is the most underutilized function in the organization. It has enormous skill and talent, which tends to be misdirected in many cases. And we have a chance to do a lot more than we're being asked to do by organizations. And of course, again, Brian was saying it's our role to convince our management that we can do some more. What I want to do this evening is present you with a framework for looking at human performance. The topic is performance engineering. As part of that, I want to present a way that I feel is beneficial for trainers, managers, in particular jointly together, to look at human performance in organizations. And then that lays down a foundation for performance engineering, and then I'd like to go on and talk about what I mean by performance engineering and what I think are the implications of all that for the training profession. I'm going to be working off of transparencies. Everybody should have hard copy of those transparencies, so what that means is we can keep the lights up, and this will be a little light up here, but you've got the important stuff in front of you, and I'll just use my transparencies to kind of guide us as to where I want to be. It's my intention to have at you for about 45 minutes here, and then we'll open it up to questions, and then I understand there's a better alternative to all that that's awaiting not in too distant future, so we won't get in the way of that. Just to start this talk about this framework of human performance, I want to tell you a story, and it's part of what got me thinking about looking at the world this way. I was asked a few years ago by a friend of mine who was a training manager to join him in a staff meeting, a high-level staff meeting, group of VPs who, among other things on the agenda, were going to be talking about training needs for the next year. So he was interested in that particular part of the talk, and so I went off to the staff meeting, and we got to see part of the regular staff meeting before the training needs, and before the training needs discussion. And one of the things that really struck me, and it kind of went into the training needs piece, was while these 6 or 8 vice presidents, engineering and manufacturing types, were all sitting around the room, someone said, well, then we got the problem with the goddamn engineers. And everybody rolled their eyes, and it was clear it wasn't the first time that they'd heard about this. And my eyebrows went up, and the guy said, we still got the problem with the engineers not getting these reports in on time. And immediately, as soon as they said that, right around the room, every vice president had a response and a solution to the problem. All right, first guy says, damn it all, it's an attitude problem. We just can't get engineers like we used to. Someone else says, it's a communication problem. Everybody knows engineers can't communicate. God made it that way or something. Someone else says, no, it's a supervision problem. We've got weak supervision. If we had the appropriate supervisors, in fact, they get on top of this. And then my favorite, it's kind of a training problem. Guy said, I think we got to train supervisors. We got to train supervisors to motivate engineers to communicate. That's my all-time favorite non-problem statement. We're going to motivate engineers to communicate. And you can never hold anybody accountable for not doing that or not doing that. And what was interesting, of course, about that, 2 things interest me about that phenomenon. I mean, you and I are always kind of at the bottom of the pile when training requests trickle down from wherever they come. Okay, usually someplace there. And we look at it, and we're not exactly sure that it's a training problem, where we can find a piece of training in there. We'd like to make a difference, but we also know it's not going to do the whole job, and there's some other things that are going to be involved. Well, I happened to be sitting there. It was some years ago, so it was great to see this thing blossom right before my very eyes, a training request. Two things struck me about it. One was that everybody defined the problem in terms of a solution. Quickly get different engineers, an attitude problem, get different engineers. It's a communication problem, train them. It's weak supervision, do something with the supervisors, etc. That happens to be a phenomenon to define problems in terms of available solutions, and training happens to be one of the favorite. The other thing that struck me about that was here was a bunch of really hard-nosed senior management types out of the trenches. I mean, engineers and manufacturing people earned their stripes. And I couldn't believe the way they responded to that statement. If it had been a different kind of statement, I'm convinced they would have responded entirely differently, in a much more rational, logical way. That is, rather than 25 or 30 engineers who didn't get the reports in on time, as the case were, if in fact, rather than engineers, we had 25 or 30 report writing machines out there, all right? Think about this now as a black box. These are report writing machines that are very complicated, very complex, cost about $1 million a piece. Only the U.S. Post Office could afford them. You put data in one end, you put ink in, you put paper in, you get reports out the other end. Okay. There's a little tag on the lid of the box from the vendor that says, "Open this lid under penalty of death." So in fact, every manager knows that they're not going to tinker with the machine, or just not going to fool around with that. But this is kind of what in fact they manage. Now someone comes into that same meeting and says, "The report writing machines are malfunctioning." Okay? And what are they going to do? They're going to ask some questions. And I believe that they're going to start asking some questions something like this. First question is going to be having to do with the results and the impact. What do you mean report writing machines are not malfunctioning? You mean all the machines, all the time? Since when? How much they're not malfunctioning? On all shifts? Under all supervisors? Tell me something about that. Okay. And the response would come back, well, the vendor who built these machines told us they would operate at 40 reports a day. They did that for a couple of years. In fact, they did it so well, we've been running up to 60, 70 reports a day the last 6, 9 months. It hasn't been a problem. Now all of a sudden we've got some malfunction, etc., etc. Well, okay, we find out we do or we don't have a problem that has some impact. We find out it's not all the report writing machines. You get to see Rummler warn, does Gretzky hang himself with... does it make any difference, basically? And how big a problem is this? What are we talking about here? Second set of questions they would have asked would be to begin to look at what I would call the machine system, all right? Every machine, every piece of equipment is part of some larger system. And these days, with all the technology involved, we don't necessarily know what goes inside, but we know something about the machine system. And they start asking some questions about the output here. And how long has it been a problem? What's the problem with slipping standards? We were supposed to run at 40, we were running at 60, now we're lucky if we can get 35 out of it, etc. Maybe that'll tell us something about it. We ask some questions about what kind of control mechanism we've got in here and feedback to the equipment. Then we go to the input and we ask some questions about the data. Are we getting the data necessary? Are we getting the ink? What about the paper? Someone says, well, again, the vendor said we're supposed to have 80-weight paper, but the purchasing department got such a deal on 60-weight paper that we've been using that for the last 3 or 4 months. We've been interleaving that, etc. All right, maybe we find the solution to the problem. My bet is, my experience is, that 70–80% of the time a line goes down, and these guys go out and take a look at that line, they're going to find a solution in looking at what I would call the machine system. Okay. If you can't, then in fact, now we call in the vendor's rep, flies 3,000 miles in overnight, comes in, everybody stands around, usually 3 or 4 levels of management, puts on the white gloves, carefully lifts the lid off the box, goes in here, and makes a very expensive but important fix on the 1 or 2 machines that aren't working. Okay? That's the way I submit that that whole group of management would have responded if it had been a report writing machine that was broken. But in fact, it wasn't. It was a people that was allegedly broken. Okay? As soon as we put a people in there, same group of managers, here is a people problem, we get this bizarre, random stuff all off the wall about what's broken, and the common solution in some way usually comes back down the chute to the training department to put a fix. Okay? Now, sometimes we can fix it. Sometimes we can't. Sometimes we can fix part of it, but if we can't fix the rest of it, etc., we got a problem. So that's the basic situation that I want to talk about. I want to talk about, now, I want to talk about at least giving people the same benefit of the doubt that we would give a machine in a system like that. Okay? I want to talk about a systems look at people, about people as part of a system, exactly like this piece of equipment. It may sound a little mechanistic to start with, or come back and hopefully convince you that it's not necessarily the case. So what I want to present is a model that ends up taking a look at people as part of a system the same way we do here, with hopefully the same kind of results, to get a rational, logical way to look at human performance in organizations. To do that, I'd like to propose that it's valuable to look at people as being part of a human performance system. That people are, in fact, one component of a 5-part human performance system. Specifically, we can look at the performer as a very complex processing system that takes in some input in every case, takes in orders, takes in looking at the dials, reading meters, whatever it is, and given what that input is, there's some particular output we want to have. And what we have working with people, of course, is that for every output, there's always some consequence, positive or negative, of doing something or not doing something. That's our 4th part of our human performance system. And I want to make a distinction here between consequences to the performer and consequences to the organization, because we get that confused a lot of times, and we try to manage performers with organization consequences. We say things like, Joe, damn it all, if you don't put the Framus on the widget properly, it's going to fall off in 3 weeks. Well, that's not a big consequence for Joe. And in fact, if the company can figure out how to ship it in 2 weeks, it won't even be a consequence to them. Okay? A consequence to Joe of putting the Framus on the widget properly is, in fact, can he do that? If he does it properly, can he get the 10 done an hour that someone's standing behind him measuring him on every hour? Can he get the 2 reports done, get the inventory dusted, get lunch, and get to the carpool and get home in time to coach the hockey team? Right? That's an important distinction that we don't always make. Here I'm talking about consequences to the performer. And the last piece is what kind of feedback or information is coming back to our performer on the consequences. And I would argue that if we look at people this way, that we can have the same results in terms of troubleshooting and engineering performance that we might get in a non-people system. And let me give you an example of this from my experience to put some flesh on my model here. The performer in question is a ticket agent out at your friendly neighborhood airport, and the input to be processed is a passenger walks up with 3 bags and says to the ticket agent, I'd like to check these 3 bags. Now, the output that the airline would like to have from our ticket agent is to say, fine, I'll check 2 of those bags for free, but I'm going to charge you a $2 excess baggage charge for the 3rd bag. Okay? Simple enough. Organizations are filled full of wonderful things like that. Cough up $2. All right? Now, let's move over here and take a look at the consequences to our performer of opening up their mouth and saying, $2, please. Now, it's conceivable that the passenger is going to just say, whoopee, and reach in your pocket and say, I was wondering what to do with the last $2 as I was leaving town here. If you've traveled to Mexico lately, they have a scheme like that. They have the airport tax down there, and just going to basically leave all the remaining pesos on the counter as you're leaving town. Which makes sense because they're devaluating so fast that by the time you got back and to exchange them, they wouldn't be worth anything anyhow. So you might as well leave them right there. But realistically, if we look at the grand spectrum of passengers that a ticket agent could run into, we got to believe that the response on the part of the customer is going to be more along the lines of, "You what? You're going to charge me $2 excess baggage charge, and I just paid $480 round-trip ticket in this crummy airline, and I do it 3 times a month, and I got $3,000 of unpaid American Express bills to prove it, and you're going to charge me $2 excess baggage charge? What kind of a chicken outfit is this? What's your name, and who's your supervisor, please?" Now, I would like to believe that that kind of a response on the part of a customer is going to register here as a negative consequence. It's my firm hope as a passenger that it does. All right? Now, if in fact it doesn't, if in fact your ticket agent says, "Oh, all right, make my day, you know. Well, we got a live one this afternoon." Yeah, and if that happens, then you got basically a selection problem, and you want to get them out of there and move them over to labor relations or purchasing. Or probably don't want them there. Now, one of the things, a basic premise here that I failed to state is around its consequences is that people, what I would like to believe, and that seems to be supported by data, that people in fact are influenced by their consequences, that people tend to do things that lead to positive consequences, and they avoid things that lead to negative consequences. I ask you to accept that for 2 reasons. One, it's the only thing that the field of psychology has agreed upon in 60 years. And if you didn't buy it, it would be a major setback. And secondly, it probably is the best explanation we have for why society hangs together as well as it does. People do tend to stop for red lights, and they do tend to go off green lights. All right, so performance, behavior is influenced by consequences. All right, so we've got this first consequence. Now, if our ticket agent persists in this foolishness and still wants the $2, there's another consequence that we're going to run into, which is really very important because it's the kind of consequences that just kind of grow and crop up in organizations. No one put it there; it just happens. It's like barnacles on the hull. You know and I know that there's no way in the civilized world an institution can handle an influx of $2 cash without filling out at least one 5-part form. All right? Conceivably, the $2 wouldn't get from the pocket into the cash register, naughty, naughty. More importantly, if it got into the cash register without the supporting paperwork, the accounting department would spend $1,500 trying to find out where the $2 came from, and that's poor business. So in fact, we've got to have ourselves the forms. Now, think about your last trip to the airport. Think about the probability. These forms are stacked neatly in great abundance at each station at the counter. Unlikely. All right, now I got myself in this. Anybody got a copy of Form 483? That one. That was last year's. It's 485. Anybody got one? All right, get the form, bring it back, fill it out, rank, serial number, handle the transaction. Lines backing up across the lobby, noise levels going up, people leaving the line and going over and buying what canes and umbrellas that they can come back and wave at the ticket agents hearing language they never heard in the training course. Really, you can do that. Got to believe that that's a negative consequence. Okay, now we'll roll along. One more, doesn't happen all the time, doesn't have to happen all the time, just enough, just to even hear that it might happen is important. Think about it, when you're standing at the ticket counter, 8 minutes to flight time, 2 people in front of you, and they're doing some kind of renegotiation of the SALT agreement or something. And you're wondering what's going to happen to get your flight. You think about it, usually 2 unmarked doors behind the counter. And one of the doors opens up and someone comes out, usually with a styrofoam cup in their hand, and it comes out. Reminds me of the great Swiss figurine clocks. They come out one door, look up, see there's work to be done, and go right back in. Some kind of a survey, And they must go back there and say, yup, they're still busy. Well, in this case, though, the door opens up. It's not your ordinary soul. It's the supervisor. Supervisor comes up to the head of the line and says, looks out, sees a long line across the lobby, goes to the head of the long line, and there is Kevin. He says, Kevin, Excuse me, but what the hell is going on? Kevin says, this guy was trying to slip this bag past us, but I got our $2, Chief. Well, again, we can look at the range of possible responses on the part of the supervisor. Kevin, that's terrific. Vigilance is next to cleanliness, which is next to godliness. All values we hold high in this organization. Carry on, unlikely. More likely, it's going to be, give me a break, Kevin. Tear up the form, give the money back to the customer, have the customer hand carried on down to the gate by the sky cap, go into the back room mumbling something about lowered hiring standards in the goddamn training department. That's it. 3's enough. Okay, rolling right along. Consequences are right there. Now, what kind of feedback is coming to us on those consequences? I mean, it meets all the criteria for good feedback. It's direct, it's immediate, it's specific, it's frequent. And it says, you got to be out of your mind to collect for excess baggage charges in this organization, okay? In fact, I submit that the sky cap is going to have to come up in front of the ticket agent with a mound of bags so high it eclipses the sun before this ticket agent is even going to notice that I got to deal with this thing, okay? It's called input unrecognition or something. All right. Now, maybe there's some help. Maybe there's some kind of feedback coming downstream from the organization back into the ticket agent. Maybe there's a monthly printout that says, here's how you're doing in collecting excess baggage charges, plan against actual, or this year against last year, or Toronto versus Montreal versus New York LaGuardia, or something like that. Nay, this airline does not track excess baggage charges. So, in fact, there is nothing coming back. We got it all right here. We got the human performance system wrapped right up. Now, what's important about this is to note that output of performers is a function of these 5 components. Poor performance is a function of these 5 components. That is to say that we cannot get performance because of a breakdown in any one of these components. 1, it was never made clear we wanted it. 2, they're too smart to do it. Detraining is called for here. They're not getting the information back that it makes any difference to anybody. It's not clear when to perform. Or, in fact, conceivably, we got a problem with our performer, right? That they don't know how to perform. So I want to talk about those 5 components as being the base for looking at performance in an organization and for being a foundation for what we might do in the way of performance engineering. Now, it's a tricky problem. This ticket agent is not going to collect for excess baggage charges. Someday, senior manager is going to come by and notice that. Now, there's a problem here. The problem in my mind is basically one of misdiagnosis, primarily because management does not have in their head as broad a comprehensive troubleshooting model as this to look at performance. So in fact, the line manager is out there, sees something not happening, you think about it, next to everything that's not happening or not happening right in your organization, there's always some poor soul standing there. Okay? That isn't working? Aha! Right? I got my hands on something here. And that's where we get in the picture. Now, sometimes we belong in the picture, sometimes we don't, but I think it's a better use of our time if we learn how to manage this particular thing. So the vice president of marketing of this particular airline is sitting in the lobby of Newark Airport one of these days, my home airport, waiting for an airplane, which is easy to do because they don't come on time. And vice president of marketing notices that the ticket agents for his or her organization aren't collecting excess baggage charges. And it really offends their sense of orderliness and being a member of senior management. And so they're a little steamed about that, so they get on the airplane on the way home and they write a memo to the vice president of operations with a copy to the vice president of personnel. And they say, I was in the field and I observed that ticket agents, and this is where we have a bit of a problem here, I was in the field and I observed that ticket agents don't know how to collect for excess baggage charges. I'll bet you dollars to donuts that that's how it'll come out. If that vice president had just said, I was in the field and I observed that ticket agents aren't collecting excess baggage charges, someone could have said, gee, I wonder why that is. Go on out and take a look. Found out what you and I found out and say, I can tell you why they're not doing it. It doesn't make any sense to do it. Right? But they don't. The communication is, I was in the field and I observed that ticket agents don't know how to collect for excess baggage charges. I don't know why they say that, but they tend to say that. All right, now the vice president of personnel's got their copy of the memo, calls in the training director, Says, what about this? And the training director says, I got you covered. In the second week of our 3-week training course for ticket agents, 9 to 12, Tuesday morning, we cover excess baggage charges, and I got it on videotape. Vice President of Personnel says, well, I never trusted that new technology. It's clear that whatever you're doing isn't doing the job, and what I want you to do is to get on your silver, or on your white horse, or your silver bird, whatever you use, and I want you to get your butt out in the field, and I want you to do some retraining or refresher training. And every time I hear the word re around training or people, a little alarm goes off back of my spine. It says, we got a breakdown in something other than the performer. We got a breakdown somewhere else in our human performance system. Retraining. People do not need to be read anything in most cases. All right? There's something else wrong. But anyhow, that's what happens. Now we're going to go off and do some retraining of our ticket agents. And what are we doing here? I mean, this is tricky. And this is tough. What we're going to do is we're going to reach down here. We're going to take the performer out of the human performance system, of which they are inextricably tied. Performance is a function of the interaction between an individual and their environment, those components in their environment. I mean, that's what it is, all right? And when you separate performers from their environment for performance environment for very long stretches of time, we've got a problem. So we're going to take them out of this very real performance system, and we're going to take them off to the human performance repair department. Okay? Okay. What we've got here is a misdiagnosed breakdown. Someone has said, we're not getting what we want to get, true. This is the faulty component. All right? So we take them off to the human performance repair department, training department. Okay? Now up there we kind of simulate the human performance system. There's our trainee. Going from performer to trainee is demotion right there. And we kind of simulate the real human performance system as part of training. Depending on your training budget, either use 3x5 cards or videotape vignettes, but we show them pictures, say, what's that? And you say, that's a passenger. Very good. How many bags do they have? 3. Well, that's good. It's not a counting deficiency. It's not a visual discrimination problem. It's not a counting deficiency. All right. What do you do when you see one? $2 of your life. Very good. And of course, in the training environment, we got hold of all the consequences we need, the most favorite being public humiliation. And we got feedback, and we got all the stuff we need. And God, in just a matter of a few short days, our ticket agents know what they knew when they went in. The only conceivable value we get out of this is if the training department's getting a little tired of these things coming back and going through and taking up valuable class time and training budgets, okay, is what you could do is kind of like a reworked carburetors. We could put a tag on the toe of the trainee that says effective March 25th, 1986, did demonstrate before God and country that they could collect for excess baggage charges, all right? And we take and we put them back in the parts bin. And we take them, they're selected from the parts bin, they're reinserted back into the human performance system here now, right? Fully recertified, though, that they know how to do it. We put them back in the human performance system where we haven't changed diddly. It's a technical term we're using in the performance business. We haven't changed anything. We haven't reconsidered the expectations and said, do we really want people to collect for excess baggage charges between 5 and 8 p.m. on Fridays and Sundays at Washington National, Chicago O'Hare, and I don't know what your airport looks like on Sunday night, but I can believe you probably don't want it to do there, because if anybody really collected for excess baggage charges at that time, it would bring the airline down faster than the air traffic controller strike. So we don't have that clarified. We have this basic kind of sometimes you do and sometimes you don't, and you figure out when it is and don't make any mistakes, okay? That kind of slipping standard. We haven't clarified that. We haven't done anything about managing the customer around consequences. We haven't done anything about changing the forms so you can handle that transaction if you really want it. We haven't figured out how to chain up the supervisors so they don't come out the back door like a cuckoo clock and dump all over. We haven't changed anything. and then the company is going to be devastated to find out that our retraining didn't take. Okay? And then we go to retraining or something or other. All right. Mildly facetious, but in fact, kind of something that we have to contend with. Defensively, we have to contend with it because it puts our reputation on the line, it wastes a lot of our professional energies and a lot of our budget training when it isn't necessarily what's necessary, or we do what training is necessary, but it's one part of it. And we're kind of at the mercy of the rest of this human performance system, which tends not to be very well managed. Now, part of what I want to talk about in terms of performance engineering is what role we can play in diagnosing these other problems and working with management to get those other fixes made, those other breakdowns in the human performance system made, as well as our own. Okay, how we can use this model is basically to troubleshoot performance, which is training needs analysis, and to design human performance systems that'll support the desired performance, and that's basically what I call performance engineering. Okay, I want to just play some variations on this model and then move to how we might use it in our training business. If I can convince you that there is such a thing as a human performance system out there, the next thing I'd like to do is try to convince you that we know the characteristics of the ideal human performance system. If these are our 5 components here, I can tell you what has to be in place for each of those components if we really want to get performance out the other end. And if you look at this list, you will be underwhelmed. There's absolutely nothing new on there. It says that, in fact, performers have to know what's expected of them, they have to have the capacity to perform, and they have to be trained to perform. They have to have adequate and appropriate criteria. They cannot, in fact, have negative consequences for the desired performance, etc., etc. So there's nothing new there, which is both good news and bad news, I guess, because in organizations we kind of keep looking for breakthroughs that will solve the problem. Okay, God, maybe there'll be a new model performer that will come out that will jump over these consequences, etc., and get the task done. Maybe the sleep learning will work, etc. We keep looking for this stuff. And I would argue that this is it. If we want ticket agents to collect for $2 excess baggage charges, we can make it happen. The technology exists. All that there's ever going to exists around that. And it has to do with managing these 5 components. So we can make the distinction, in one sense, between wishing for performance versus engineering or managing performance. And boy, we do a whole lot of wishing for performance in organizations. And while we're sitting here, probably there's a half a dozen memos being generated out there exhorting people to do new things, follow new procedures. And if we sat down and looked at them in terms of the human performance system, we would know that those babies aren't going to last 3 or 4 weeks. All right? So that's one important thing to keep in mind. We can engineer performance if we want to. We spend a lot of time wishing for it. Second is to take into account that human performance problems are multi-causal. All right? We tend to behave as if there's one thing wrong, and if we can find the one thing that's not working out there, we can find that cause. We can then go by the program, put the program against the cause, and the problem will go away. Right? And it doesn't match my experience around human performance. Really, we got a problem if they don't know what's expected of them. Okay, let's get them to do that. All right, now can they do it? Well, they don't know how to do it. All right, let's get them to do it. They know how to do it. Now will they do it? No, problem is now they know better than to do it. See, this is getting very complex. Got to fix the consequence. All right, they know what's expected. They know how to do it. They're not getting kicked in the tail for doing it. All right? Now, are they going to continue to do it? No, because they aren't getting any kind of continuing trend data back, so they can see when the thing begins to drift off and they can take corrective action. All right, so it goes. The point being that these things are really interdependent, and we have to work with all of them. It's like the old Christmas tree bulbs that are wired in series rather than parallel. One of these bulbs goes out, this whole line goes down. More importantly, when 2 of these bulbs go out, which is frequently the case, we've got to spend a little bit of time trying to figure out what's not happening. So how we can use this, as I said, is troubleshooting, and the task there is use this like a template. I'm telling you that if you want performance, I don't care what it is or where it is in the organization, you've got to have these 5 things in place. So the next time someone comes in the office and says the yo-yo's on the 3rd shift or in the western region, wherever you keep the yo-yo's here, I meant the far western Providence. I mean as in the Pacific Ocean, way out there. Someone says the so-and-sos aren't doing X. They're not doing whatever it is, all right? Well, then, if this is what you got to have to get performance, then we got to put this like a template right over what's actually there. We got to ask some questions, and we got to ask, is this there? Is this there? Is this there? Is this there? And where it ain't there, that's what we got to fix. All right? And the point is that there are probably going to be a couple of those things that we got to fix. There isn't going to be just one thing. And we can't just fix the first thing like my auto mechanic and my plumber do and send the thing back and say it's all fixed. Right? Don't understand the system interdependency. Okay? We got to go through. So what happens when we use this to look at performance is we end up writing a comprehensive prescription to fix the 2 or 3 things. All right? If we want to get performance. So if we want to get performance, we've got to manage all these things. Troubleshoot, design, and of course this becomes then the foundation for what I call performance engineering. What we want to do is manage all of these things if we're in fact going to get total performance out the other end. Okay. Well, let me just say one other thing about this, which is a problem for us in this business, is where does all this come together? Well, I argue that it in fact comes, it all revolves around any given performer. It has great implications for the role of management. I'd argue that what a manager should manage is not people, but the human performance system. Because if they don't manage this whole thing at whatever level, it doesn't get managed. If you look at organizations, we've got a problem. If any of these things are broken, how do you get it fixed in organizations? Is there an outputs department? No. Maybe there's an industrial engineering department. Is there a consequence department? No. Is there a feedback department? Well, some data processing departments like to have you believe that, but it ain't necessarily the case. What kind of department is there? There's a training department. It's a training department. Contend that when there looks like there's a problem with people, that it's frequently a function of a breakdown somewhere else in the human performance system. People happen to be the only component in the system. They got a voice box. They're the only ones that can decide to be tardy, or be absent, or to grouse, or whatever. All right? How you fix a lot of those people problems is, in fact, to fix whatever is broken in the human performance system. But the problem is, when we get a break, the manager wants help, goes to the phone directory, goes down through there. Who can help? You look for a department that can help. Well, shipping department, that's a thought. Probably couldn't get away with that. Next department, it's the training department. Well, I don't know. It's got to be a piece of it. So we call it the training department, and we're in business. Okay. The point is, we're not always in the kind of business that we really want to be in. So part of our issue is organizationally, how we get things on our doorstep and how we deal with them is a function of breakdown somewhere else in this human performance system that's got to have some broader kind of engineering. Okay, a couple of variations on this. First is to keep in mind that organizations are in fact hierarchies of human performance systems. Everybody is in it, in one. We like to believe that only the hourly people have to contend with this nonsense. There's a lot of data that says even salaried people are caught up in the human performance system. And that's important because both in troubleshooting, when we tend to see problems in organizations at one level, we know that the cause and the solution is not necessarily at that level, that we've got interdependency of these human performance systems. In fact, I think there's a PhD thesis here for someone, if they're interested, in the correlation between poor performance in organizations and gravity. Always seems to drift to the bottom somehow. And we know that it may manifest itself here, but we got to move someplace else if we want to make it happen. And also when we design solutions, we put in nifty solutions at one level, and we don't take into account the impact that has on the fine balance of these human performance systems. I told you the story about the ticket agent a minute ago. Asked for $2. One of the things that happens is that their boss, the passenger services supervisor, comes out of the back door and dumps all over him. Says, Kevin, get moving. Okay, gee, if some people were standing over here and saw that happen, they'd say, my God, that Rummler, what what an insensitive son of a gun of a supervisor he is. Let's get him off the sensitivity training, get him fixed. Well, before we do that, we give the passenger services supervisor the same benefit of the doubt we give the ticket agent. Before we send them off, let's take a look at the human performance system they're part of. What we're looking for here, see, that's key to this in terms of it being humanistic, not mechanistic. Our assumption going in is not that the performer is broken. Our assumption going in is the performer is not necessarily broken. So let's look for some rational explanation outside of the performer first for that bizarre, seemingly bizarre behavior. So we take a look at the passenger services supervisor, and one of the things we see is, like every supervisor in the world, they got more they can do in a year, in any given day. This supervisor is responsible for excess baggage charges. That's obvious, except I also told you that this airline doesn't measure baggage charges, excess baggage charges, right? So there's no feedback and no consequences there, so scratch that one. There is another one up here, though, the old AWT-ATO problem that you didn't even know existed, but you've been part of it most of your adult lives. That's called the average wait time at the airport ticket office. This airline, like most airlines, has a standard for how long you're supposed to wait in line to get your ticket. All right? And to support that, the standard's about 10 minutes. They have another whole hierarchy of performers over here that are concerned with that and some other things. It's called the quality assurance function. That's the official title. The working title of the rest of the organization is Rat Finks. The person at the bottom of this pile has a clipboard and a stopwatch, and they skulk about the potted palms in the lobby doing racial delay studies as to how long people wait in line to get their tickets, okay? So then we'll code that stuff. Great data. I mean, geez, if you could take that and give it to the passenger services supervisor, they could plan their staffing for peaks and valleys and all stuff, dynamite stuff. Sorry, that information, that's inspection information, that's quality information, that's confidential. If we gave that information to the supervisor, it'd make their job too easy, and it'd take all the fun out of being their boss. So in fact, what happens, this is filed as a weekly confidential report. It goes up to this level, then it's compiled into a monthly confidential report. And on a monthly report, it transcends the organization from the quality assurance organization over to the passenger services organization, where the report then descends down through the organization at 32 feet per second is used to nail errant supervisors to the wall, whether needed or not. And of course, they all do by that time because they haven't any data for a month. That's a piece, not the whole, that's just a piece of the human performance system of our passenger services supervisor. So when he or she walks out the door and sees Kevin there in the line backing up across the lobby, I go to the head of the line to see what's going on. I got a trade-off between a lousy $2 and this line going across the lobby, and the system sets my priorities just like it would for most any of us that are in that particular situation. Okay. Now this helps us see that. This helps us talk to management about it. It's powerful in getting both managers to look at a broader spectrum of what's going on, and it really can open up communication for trainers in terms of coming back and doing some testing as to how serious are we about this really being a training situation that we want to work on. Okay, so that's another piece of this, is we got to understand that performers are in a hierarchy. Same model, doing just one variation on here. Instead of just looking at one output and the consequences, what we want to do is look at two outputs, the desired output and the undesired output, which is frequently the current output. And we want to look at the consequences and feedback on both of those. Basically the balance of consequence, a key piece of our model that helps us look at performance and see what's going on. I said earlier, performance is influenced by its consequences. If you believe that, then we got this kind of a problem. We got a performer in here who persists in doing the wrong thing. We got engineers that won't get the reports in on time. Now, why is that? Assuming that they know the difference, this model says there's something either very positive operating for doing the wrong thing, as far as they're concerned, or more likely there's something fairly negative lurking in the woods for doing the right thing. So when I don't see what I want to have happen, I got to stay with this analysis and look for some logical explanation for what is seemingly bizarre performance. What's going on here? I'm going to go back to our engineers who weren't getting the reports in on time. Turns out that was, cut off the motivation, the communication to get down. And turns out a group of engineers weren't getting reports in on time. Turns out it's a particular report was very important to the organization. It was the basis of bids, et cetera, et cetera. So I went out and talked to some of these engineers, used some very sophisticated questioning techniques that we had developed deep in the bowels of the University of Michigan many years ago as a graduate student. Went up to these engineers and said, hey, how come you don't get these reports in on time? And he blew them away, the subtleness of the whole thing. And they came back equally subtle and said, which reports? God, I'm up to my armpits in reports. I made a mistake. I went to engineering school. I should have gone to report writing school. Oh, he said, these reports. They said, well, we don't get those in on time because they're not important. How do you mean they're not important? Well, because nothing happens when we don't get them in on time. Trick. So we went a little further, and I said, talk to me specifically, what happens to you if you get this report in on time? He said, well, you got to understand two things here. One is, we don't have real clear standards as to what a good report looks like. All right? It's never been articulated, and so we sort of have to negotiate that with our new supervisor. It's called breaking in the supervisor. And they were doing a lot of that because they were running through supervisors pretty fast down there. So you got to understand we have to kind of negotiate what's expected. Then the other thing you have to understand is that there are really two deadlines here. There's the 5th of the month deadline when we're supposed to have this thing in to the boss. Okay, we'll call that the phony deadline, tip you off. There's another deadline when this has to be upstairs to the old man. That we'll call the real deadline. If I do what desired, I turn this report in on time as defined by before the 5th day of the working month, or even substantially before the 15th of the month. My supervisor takes out his pencil and plays freshman English teacher. Says, straighten this out, clean this up, expand on this, cut this, and get it back. Okay? So the consequence of getting the report in on time is that you get to do it again. What happens if you get the report in late? I mean, like really late. Like the 17th of the month. Aha. Then if the supervisor wants the thing fixed, they rewrite it, get their clerical support to retype it, and it goes on upstairs. All right? So the consequence of getting the report in really late is that you never see it again. All right? The balance of consequences. Fundamental thing at the root of a lot of things that we have to contend with. One, we end up training for things that really are balance of consequence problems, but probably more importantly, our good training is out there and the balance of consequences doesn't support it. And so we end up kind of losing in the long run. Okay, so that's a key piece of this. And then we can put that together in what we call the human performance system template. Same model, except what this allows us to do is put in some names. The performer or engineers. The input is the end of the month. Desired output is reports on time. Undesired is late reports, etc. And we can work this across. And what we're going to do is notice that we're going to talk about the consequences to the performer for the desired and undesired. And we're going to look at the consequences to the organization in most cases. We're going to juxtapose those two things. I talked about the fact that we tend to manage individual performance with organization consequences, and it doesn't work so good. It's an interesting little exercise because we go through this, and frequently, boy, I mean, there are super consequences to the organization for this doing this right. And we've got to scratch around to come up with any good reason, in many cases, why the folks ought to do it. Now, we can close that gap by taking time to look at it this way. So basically what this template or this worksheet allows you to do is to take a snapshot of the human performance system, hold it still long enough, and just say, okay, let's put some things in here. And having done that, then we can begin to do some troubleshooting and question what we can move around to get to performance. And so we really then can use this as the basis to do performance engineering, which is to change those things in the environment to supplement our training to, in fact, get the performance out the other end that we want to get. Now, once we've got our snapshot of the human performance system, we really go to our final stage, and we can do some troubleshooting. Now we've got the thing on the wall, and literally we do that with trainers and managers. That last worksheet, you get a group of people together, and you take the problem and put it on the wall. See what you can do. What this says, in effect, bottom line is there are 6 things that we've got to work with if we want to get performance in organizations. Performance specification. We got some questions here, troubleshooting questions. Are the standards clear, etc. Because when we're troubleshooting, the question we want to ask is, where has the human performance system broken down? We know that that's the case. When someone comes in and says X isn't working, where is it broken down? Performance specification, the thing we call task interference, just physically impossible. There are lack of resources, etc., to produce the output. Like the consequences, feedback, and then we get to the performer. We got a knowledge skill issue. Last possibility is that we've got an individual problem. We got a bummer. We got one of God's defects here. Okay? Low probability. It took me years before I put that on here, because that's kind of, it was, tends to be everyone's first choice if you make that an option. Well, replace the worker. Okay? And this suggests really a troubleshooting sequence in terms of performance. Our experience is that it really runs in about this order, like troubleshooting an electrical mechanical system, where the maintenance people learn by likelihood of breakdown and impact of a breakdown. We got the same thing in terms of looking at people. It says troubleshooting, but obviously the same questions have to do with designing or engineering. These are the answers. We got a new system we're putting in. We got a new procedure. We got this wonderful output. Let's ask the question, have we got this covered, this covered, this covered? Point being that we've got to have a comprehensive look at these pieces if we're going to get anywhere. Now, put that, I guess, all of this together, and this ends up being, we might call the components of a productive environment. In any organization, in terms of getting any desired output, driving any process here, we've got a hierarchy of performers, and we got 6 things that have to be in place. Performance has to be specified, task interference removed, feedback available, etc., etc. We can use that to diagnose. If we're not getting the performance we want out the other end, we can put this over and ask questions to see which cells we've got some deficiencies in. Once we've making some changes, no matter what we're going to do, we can use it to design and say, have we in fact got every one of these cells appropriately covered? Because if we got an opening in here, and we've just done some nifty new standards for our workers, we just trained the daylights out of them, and what we failed to do is look at the consequences of the supervisor, because they're being measured on the number of units, the number of phone calls handled per hour. We just came up with a training program that worked on increased customer service of our people in the trenches, all right? And we just aren't going to get the performance out the other end. So we can use this really as a template to say, have we done the job here, covered all the holes in order to get the performance? And then, of course, the concern for us is that knowledge and skill in place. That's us. Okay? How vulnerable we are. We got one piece of the action. Doesn't have as much leverage as we'd like to have. We can put our best efforts in there, and if these other pieces aren't in place, we tend to be going to be in deep trouble. So I would argue, and have for some period of time, that what training functions should begin to move to, kind of the next thing, the next piece of the future, is broadening the scope and asking questions about the rest of the human performance system in terms of seeing what else has to be done to support our training, and eventually, in fact, beginning to move into some of these other areas and do some of that design beyond just training, because it's not getting done anyplace else in the organization, and it really won't get done. So, in terms of a scale, these are some organization variations on how that's done in client organizations that we've worked with over the years. You got three increasing levels of involvement. One is just making recommendations for changes in the human performance system to support your training, in which case you get a performance-based or performance-oriented training department like you have here. The next move is to, in fact, assume some of the responsibility to coordinate changes in the performance system, and is to head a task force to get these other things fixed to support what we want to get done. And it takes these forms, performance councils, special task forces, etc. And I guess the ultimate, as far as I'm concerned, is that our training department at some point begins to turn into what I would call a performance engineering department, and where we're expected and called upon to look at the larger picture. Our questions are tolerated, and we in fact help the organization really get the improved performance that it wants. That suggests finally a particular process here. It's not a very sophisticated model, but basically has to do with when a training request comes in the front end or whatever, is that we go through some questions about the significance of this. We in fact do some cause analysis, and of course I'd like to see the human performance system model used as part of that. We're obviously going to have training to do, but we're going to have other things to do as well in order to get a performance system design or redesign. And we follow through something like this. So if we're going to move towards performance engineering in training and in organizations, we have to move to some approximation to asking these questions in this kind of sequence if we're going to make a particular difference. I think that that the opportunities are terrific. Just following the progression that Brian was talking about. What we're really concerned about is training making a difference. And I think before we can make the full difference that we know we can make, we've got to deal with these other pieces of the human performance system. We can use this thought defensively to at least protect our hind side and say, would you please fix these other things so that our good training is going to make a difference. Hopefully we can go beyond that eventually and begin to say, hey, training is one piece of it, but we've got to get these other things in place, and let us help you diagnose that and design that if we want to make a difference. And that, in fact, then is what Geary Rummler thinks performance engineering is all about. I really appreciate the chance to have at you with these concepts. I think that what you're doing here